For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. Earlier this year, the book The Digital First Customer Experience drew a lot of attention, and that's in a market where there's a lot of business books published every year. And that's in no small part, I think, to the author and today's guest, Joe Wheeler. So Joe and I go way back, and that really reflects the work that he did around the service profit chain, which was still today, I think, the best piece of thinking when it comes to linking employees and their contribution to customer experience to business profitability, which is still a hot topic today, but the work that was done in the 1990s has remained, I think, the foundation for a lot of that. So in the book, Joe goes on to look at design strategies digitally of some of the leading brands, and these include companies like Nike, Amazon, and Starbucks. And if you read the book, it's very much centered around these kind of case studies. But perhaps most interestingly enough, Joe tries to bring, and I think succeeds in doing so, the employee equation back into the digital universe. And so today on this call, we had a chance to explore these strategies and how they've changed over the years. Really a chance to look back at the pivotal role of customer experience, especially in a landscape that's increasingly digitally driven. But at the same time, we have these amazing technological advancements. It still gets centered around the idea of people in the business. I have to add that in addition to his success as a multiple best-selling author, Joe has held executive positions both at Bank of America and the Forum Corporation, and brings very practical experience to the narrative he provides, as well as his books. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Joe Wheeler, thank you very much for joining me today. You and I, and maybe this is an admission of age here, the risk is we start talking about the first time we met, but the service profit chain sort of put you on the map a long time ago, and that was a breakthrough piece of work. And now we're here to celebrate the release of your new book. And in some ways, that story arc's interesting because back when the service profit chain first came out, which, what's that, late 80s, early 90s? Are we talking about?
Yeah, I think kind of late 90s, right? Late 90s. Yeah.
The concept of digital transformation, digital first customer experiences was embryonic, right? I mean, the internet was embryonic, mid to late 90s. And now it's your focus. And so perhaps we just start by, giving everyone the benefit of a synopsis to the degree you can about what the new book's about.
Oh, absolutely. And so, first of all, it's great to be here and great to spend some time with you. As you said, we've been both at bat at this game for quite some time. So it's nice to see you. When Jim and Earl and Len wrote the first service profit chain book, it really was kind of seminal research, as you recall, Richard, right? I mean, they were the ones that introduced the concept of a top box score was different than an average customer satisfaction score, and the relationship between employees, customers, and shareholders. So I have to say, here all these years later, that still really hasn't changed. I mean, when you look at one of the case studies in the book is Starbucks. Right. And one of the things that's really helping them with their turnaround is their Thrive initiative, which looks a lot like the service profit chain, because they realized, central to their, what they called their digital flywheel, was how partners were engaged in the whole experience. So I landed on writing this book because I was trying to connect two statements. One was, whenever I give a talk on customer experience, I typically open with a comment by Charlotte Beers. And she said, the truth is what makes a brand powerful is the emotional involvement of customers. And that's hard to argue with. At the same time, a great friend of mine, an expert in digital transformation, said during the pandemic, it should be the aspirational goal of every company to deliver a touchless experience. So to me, that was curious. These are two very smart people with, and that seemed like good advice with lockdown. So the digital first customer experience seeks to kind of reconcile those two statements to say, have we come far enough that technology can actually create emotional involvement that we would typically expect from frontline staff?
And what struck me about the book was, in some ways, the answer is maybe.
Yeah.
Right? There's sort of this sense of, on one hand, you have case studies, as you say, Starbucks, which are very much still centered around the whole issue of no matter what we do with digital, at the end of the day, we're a people business, right?
Right. Right.
But at the same time, there's pure digital companies that whose objective is to essentially eliminate humans from the mix.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is the fundamental struggle for a lot of companies right now. And the thing that is difficult for them to imagine is how fast this transformation is coming. But I think it's coming quite quickly. I mean, one of our design principles, Richard, is this notion of how to achieve emotional peaks across channels and finish strong, right? The end of the experience really
Yeah,
matters because this makes it more memorable. Well, the example I used there wasn't Starbucks, it was Lemonade, because
yeah.
I thought that's a bit more controversial because they're, a completely digital company for the most part. When you have a claim, if at some point you can talk to a claims adjuster, but often they'll just actually say, yeah, your claim's been approved, the money's in your bank account, go party. Now, here's what's interesting. If you and I did a word cloud on all the customer testimonials for Lemonade, the word that would pop the most is love. So think about that for a second. This is fundamentally people talking to a bot, yet having a very positive emotional experience. So that to me is what's interesting today is what will be the role of technology to not just automate frequently asked questions and make things more efficient, but to what extent will technology actually create emotional involvement in combination with people? Obviously, like I said, does digital first mean people second? Of course not. But I think companies need to think differently about how they design experiences to incorporate that capability.
So there's so many different ways to play this out. So I mean,
Yeah.
I thought the Lemonade, for an industry that hasn't been at the forefront of that
Yeah.
sort of technology transition. I mean, the insurance industry is probably one of the least digitally transformed industries. There are exceptions to that, of course, but now you've got a new entrant like Lemonade. How much of this, I mean, what springs to mind to me is demographic. Come on, Lemonade works because of demographic. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily, I mean, at the end of the day, the dividing line is generational. And during the COVID time, I think you'll resonate with this. I was chairing a group of finance industry CX professionals. It was all virtual because it was COVID, and they were meeting once a quarter. And the degree to which it had accelerated, COVID had accelerated investments in digital for these banks. These are large money center banks typically,
Right.
was colossal. And the reticence up to that point had been demographic. Look, the people with the money, not to put too fine a point on it, are over 50. The
Yeah.
people who want to go to bank branches are over 60. And the people who want to do it on the phone are under 30 and they don't have any money.
Yeah.
And so, and that's been an excuse in the past not to invest aggressively in digital because, hey, the people with the money don't want it. Have we seen a collapsing of the demographic spread, or is that still the rule?
No, I think we have, and I heard an executive from Bank of America talk about this on a podcast because the podcaster said to her, surely your digital play is more appealing to your younger customers. She said, not at all. She said, actually, that's not a factor anymore, and I think it makes sense. I mean, when you think of the impact, especially generative AI, Richard, will have on just how we interface. In the first era, we typed into computers, right? In the second era, we used the mouse and pointing devices. And now with ambient conversational AI, I mean, the technology is just there. It's anticipating what we're going to want to know next. So I do think that's starting to crumble a little bit.
Yeah, and COVID probably accelerated that, right? Because
Right.
branches closed, so what you're going to do? Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to try these digital tools, and I mean, I don't mean to be condescending, but I mean, some generations are like, I need kids to come and help me show you how to use it. That's actually what was happening.
Yeah.
But guess what? You go through the learning curve, you figure it out. You raised another issue about love and lemonade, and what immediately struck me was if we can use technology like ChatGPT to engage in conversations that evoke emotions, how risky is that? I mean, aren't we? Aren't we? I mean, not just, and I'm not to a societal level, although there's questions at society, but even just as a business, do you want your AI befriending your customer? Do you want them to? Isn't that a little bit of a pretty big, well, a little bit big risk?
Well, you and I suffer from a similar disease, I think, which is just constant curiosity. I mean, I'm just as curious about this as well. I'll give you a good example. There's a bot named Michaela, little Michaela, okay, on Instagram. She's an Instagram model. You can pay for her to post your product. Like Prada has done work with her. It costs like $8,000 for her to post about your product. Now she has 3 million followers who talk to Michaela constantly. Okay, now she's 19 years old, lives in LA, has been 19 years old for 3 years when she began.
And will be for a lot longer.
What is that about?
And
So
is that okay?
is that okay? That's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, she's got a job, which is the company that invented her to kind of sell advertising, right? And to kind of promote products. So I guess it all comes back to context, right? Like for one of the companies I feature is helping with senior citizens who are living at home. And they have a solution that is incredibly powerful because it not just gives them reminders of when they can take their medication or when they might set up and stretch and actually kind of really help with in-home healthcare, which of course is a huge problem in the United States. Um, in the pilot participants all said it felt like companionship. Of course, they knew they were talking to a computer, but there is a chronic problem of loneliness of seniors in the world, and this addresses that. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. It can tell. It can say, "Hey, Joe, would you like to talk to your nephew? It's his birthday."
We talk to our dogs and we think they understand us. They don't, right? Why not an artificial friend? I think it raised all sorts of interesting questions. But getting back to your core thesis of delivering on customer experience and employee experience,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, I was interested when I started reading the book. I'd expected this to be very much okay. This is digital. We're talking here about everything is digital all the time, but in fact, to the contrary. I mean, I think in some ways you do sort of come right back to the idea that this is a complex people equation, that there's trade-offs to be made here. And isn't there a risk right now that companies aren't thinking through their choices very clearly? And you make an observation in the book, I think, about the degree of thinking about where you want to apply technology and where you don't, and how you want to apply it and how you don't, and making those choices, which I think is just instrumental to this.
Right.
And yet seems often absent from digital transformation initiatives, which are, not to put too fine a point on it, just a spending spree on
Right.
automating everything that they can. So are we not being selective enough, or is that the key message of the book? Be more selective.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, one of the things, and this is, looking a little bit in the past, Richard, but one of the things I always felt you helped clients with back in your Set Metrics days was to be wickedly precise about what were loyalty drivers and really what weren't. And that over-investing in things that didn't kind of shape behaviors like retention, advocacy, spending was a fool's errand. And I think that was incredibly helpful. In fact, I do a piece in the book called, Focus on the Right Problems, because you
Yeah.
do see
Yeah.
organizations double downing with technology to solve things that may or may not matter because it could be cheap and maybe we'll scale quickly. So when Sean and I wrote Managing Customer Experience, we said the best companies in the world deliver an experience that's consistent, intentional, differentiated, and valuable. That's the same. What's different is how companies deliver on that and the way you understand what those loyalty drivers and moments of truth that influence them are has changed quite a bit. And I'll share one thing with you that I feel like is a little bit controversial. I think I depart a little bit with some of,
Go for it.
well,
Now my interest is piqued.
one of the companies that are featured is a cement company. Okay, Richard,
Yeah.
these guys deliver
Cemex.
ready mix cement, Cemex, right?
Right.
And this is about as commodity as you get. Now, they did a great job of understanding customers and what were the problems that needed to be solved. But they didn't start there. They started off by understanding technology. And they benchmark companies like American Express, who do a great job with their call centers capability, and a whole bunch of others. Now, you might say, well, wasn't that the wrong thing to do? Wouldn't you understand the customer requirements, voice the customer, and then figure it out? But what I learned from these companies is that, and I've learned this from companies in California that we started work with many years ago, when you look at the problem through a digital first lens, you tend to see it differently, and you'll land on solutions that are a bit different. If you don't start there, you tend to, because we're all humans, default to what you know. So I do believe there's a change in how we think about CX design because, just the digital tsunami is here. How we're interacting with each other and with brands is fundamentally different. Going into design work, not understanding what's possible, I think is a bit risky. So I think that's a change for us.
No, I look, that makes perfect sense for me. I'm thinking sort of concreting the cow paths, Mike Hammer, 1990s, right? This is, if you're not automation, right, which was the predecessor to digital transformation. So
Yeah,
you're just basically going to try and find better ways to automate terrible processes.
right.
And as you said, to some extent, if we look at what's really broken through in experiences over the last 20 years, most of them are highly original. They're models of interaction that didn't previously exist, that couldn't have existed without enabling technology. I mean, you couldn't have
Right.
an Uber without a smartphone, right?
Right.
It was
Exactly.
an underlying enabling technology. So I do think coming at it from both sides makes sense. I think there's an over dependence today on fixating on certain channels of interaction with customers and
Yeah.
trying very hard to optimize them to the exclusion. I mean, you said Lemonade's a great example of a company that in some ways recreated its entire interactive channel with its customer, right? Whereas most companies right now are trying desperately to make their contact center operations more efficient, really, introducing bots.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful, rather humorous commercial for Zendesk, I think, where they have a retired AI bot who was rather inept at answering questions. It's funny because it's so close to the reality of how a lot of bots operate, right? Did I help you with your question? How
Yes.
hard can I slam the no button? I mean, I'm sort of, I want to actually reach into the machine and grab that thing. So it does seem to make sense to me to start with what's possible because that's how Silicon Valley works, right? People
Right.
say, and AI, I think, is it's a good segue into AI because in some ways we're having to rethink what's possible now because of technology and machine learning and AI. And there is an argument for saying, well, given what's available, and generative is a good example, how
Mm.
does that change the way we think about delivering experiences?
Oh, I think it's fundamental. And I'll say two quick points about this, Richard. One is, as I say in this keynote I give, when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT, the genie came out of the bottle. That was like a big pivot for the world, quite honestly. But there's a difference between kind of consumer solutions like that and enterprise grade machine learning applications using much more different data sets than Reddit. You know what I mean? Like those are powerful. Like Lemonade thinks they'll use Gen AI to automate 100 processes that they've used cases for. So I just want to make that distinction. People shouldn't kind of default to what their experience is searching for information about Richard Owen on ChatGPT versus what an enterprise application does. The second thing, though, is the thing that I think is always kind of missed about machine learning is the learning part of it. That's the big difference in generative AI is now it's a self-training model, right? In previous, so that's a big thing. I mean, what we'll see is, and this is from my experience in talking to the case study companies, is those large language models and the foundation models that support them will get more narrow. It'll be very domain specific, and that will reduce hallucinations quite a bit. But the powerful thing that you read in the book is around if there's a potential for a flywheel in your business to personalize the experience, to then make it more relevant to customers, which is really this transition from the attention economy to the value economy, then generative AI can really help with turn that cycle faster and will have a big impact as long as it's not creepy. Most consumers we've all had experiences where they've thought, really? How did they know I was searching for a mortgage? Like, I didn't tell anybody. I was just thinking it. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, well, it's often it's just the interconnectivity between Google products, right, is
Right.
freaky. It's what you sooner or later you realize that it's all being interconnected, and it does seem a little disconcerting. But I also think our level of being attuned to that has declined so much, right? We are so much more comfortable with the idea that technologies seem to be anticipating what we're thinking as being a service and no longer as a threat.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to me that there's a lot of media around the threat, the existential threat to mankind associated with AI.
Yeah.
going on at the same time. And I think that so we have this narrative. We have on one hand, this is a great tool, and on the other hand, we have the sort of Terminator scenario where no, it's going to take over the world and kill us all.
Right.
And so we're going to be striking a balance with this for a while, aren't we? I mean, this is going to be a fun debate to have, and if we're wrong, we're all dead anyway. So
Well, here's where I follow this argument, because I kind of speak to this as well. So there were these researchers that looked at 133 years of data in Wales and Scotland to evaluate did technology destroy more jobs than it created. And they concluded actually technology created more jobs over that time period. Now, is that a corollary for today? I don't think so. But at the same time, I do think we saw this with the weaving wheel, or the weaving loom, I should say, right? Where they protested in 1900 because they were going to lose, weavers were going to lose their jobs. So I think this is not a new thing. Here's what, the way I think about this is, in the examples like lemonade, like, to me, not to overdo that example, Richard, but they're not going to not have makers, folks that do claims, but they're going to make their roles really more interesting with this technology. So if you're a claims adjuster at Lemonade, your job is a pretty cool job, because when you need to make a choice on that claim, it's been pre-populated with all the data you need to make those decisions versus searching 9 screens to try to determine should they get a claim or not. So I guess my message to customers is, no matter where you fall on this debate, standing on the sidelines is not a great idea.
right.
It's just not, because you and I are seeing lots of companies who are doubling down on how to use this to take not like a point out of operating margin, 15 points out of operating margin. And anyway, so I think you have to get in the pool.
And it will eliminate jobs. I mean, the net effect may be positive, but there'll be a disruptive period, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was, I think it was the Luddites that protested, spinning jenny or whatever it was in industrial England, right? And we still use the term, ironically. But I think that they're followers of Charles Ludd. But if you look at it now, a lot of companies' first instinct when they see any form of technology, especially one that looks like it can substitute for human capital, is to say, aha, here's our chance, right? And people are conscious of this. You have the strike that was going on in Hollywood from the writers, because hey, wait a second, AI is going to replace us. So aren't people right to assume to some degree that the company's first instinct is cost reduction? Aren't customers at the same time going to be guinea pigs, where companies are first instinct is to replace humans, put in technology, and then see whether that works? And and without that focus on whether customers feel like at the end of the day they're better served, the risk is the money's too good, right? Just take the money and run.
Well, that's a great question. It may be, I'd love to know your point of view about this. Quite honestly, what I noticed about the companies studied in the book, like take Nike, for example, which is just an amazing company for my book. And what makes them unique, and what I try to do with the case studies, as you saw, was kind of go deep on these companies, as opposed to writing one chapter and have 9 examples. I had a chapter and I wrote one. Is they're completely committed to their brand, about supporting the athlete in everyone. If you have a body, you're an athlete. And so I think the great companies will always be true to their brand and true to the experience, and will get the right combination of technology, human, employees. Like, I think they are service profit chain leaders, quite honestly, what Jim and I and Earl wrote about back in the Ownership Quotient. But they also, they report to all 3 stakeholders. Can they exceed expectations of customers? Can they exceed the expectations of employees and deliver on shareholder returns? Great companies understand they serve those 3 stakeholders, equally important. And if you take care of employees, they'll take care of customers and they'll take care of shareholders. Quite honestly, if you're focused to be the cost leadership company in your market, you might follow the route you just articulately described, which is let's just rip out the cost as far as we can. But those aren't the companies I tend to work with, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think it comes down to one word for me, at least, is productivity, right?
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, cost reduction and productivity aren't synonymous. I think what the application of technology can do here is improve productivity, whether that's productivity of salespeople. I mean, obviously, the thing we focus a lot on is more B2B, so we're looking at the productivity of people who are in B2B customer interactions.
Yeah.
But a contact center employee, if you can make them more productive, then as society we improve, because that's what creates GDP growth, right? We
Right.
want more productivity. Employees make more money because it's easier to pay people more if they're more productive.
Right.
And technology's there as a tool. And there was some great research came out of MIT around, which you could summarize. I'm sure they won't appreciate me murdering it like this, but human versus machine versus human plus machine win, right?
Right.
And basically that's it.
Yeah.
There's somebody gave their life's work to proving that, but I summarized it in one ugly sentence.
Yeah.
But I think if we were to staple that to our office clipboard and say, okay, human plus machine is better than either scenario. How do we constantly construct those high productivity concepts?
Yeah.
Right. With all due respect to the Hollywood writers, isn't there some way that ChatGPT, OpenAI technologies, whatever, makes their jobs more productive, makes them higher value, makes them better paid, right?
Mm.
If we can connect those dots, then we're better off as a society. And I do agree with you. I think companies are going to either start from the point of view of digital transformation as something that is going to increase productivity, delight customers, and in doing so, that combination means better profits, because you
Right.
almost can't go wrong if you get those two things right. And you'll get the other group that says, how is this a way just to accelerate cost reduction?
Mhm.
And they'll make very different choices. And, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the other thing I notice is, like you, I read all these studies from the big consulting firms around jobs that will change, what jobs are at risk, what are not. Healthcare actually is going to increase jobs because technology is going to need humans in the room who are certified to be able to handle it, right? Retail, they predict, is really going to get hurt badly. Having said that, we have a great relationship with a company called Retail Next. I have an ebook coming out with them shortly about the new agenda for growth, 5 imperatives for the digital savvy retailer. What they will tell you, Richard, is that a high performing frontline salesperson sells over twice as much as a moderate performer. Now, I'm sure there's going to be generative AI technology that will change the retail experience first, but I would hire that high performer every day of the week, because they will do things that an interactive kiosk will not just won't be able to do, because computers can deliver a perception of empathy, but they can't deliver empathy. Like, that's the difference that we need to really remember. So I encourage your listeners to buy those reports. They're helpful, but to keep a high degree of, I don't want to say skepticism, but keep your BS detector on high when you look at those numbers.
And we've heard this for a long time, right? So we're talking about the late 90s. I mean, 1998 was when I started running Dell.com. And the one thing we knew for sure then was that retail was dead. Dead, I tell you, was going to be gone. And if you'd have asked me how long, we'd have said with total certainty, it can't survive a decade, right? I mean, turn the high streets into parking lots, because who in their right mind would buy anything? And so we were wrong and right. I mean, this was the
Yeah.
interesting thing, right? The technology transformed productivity again.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what a retail experience, an optimal retail experience, is likely to be a decade from now,
Yeah.
you as a customer, yes, you'll do your research online. You may go into a store for fulfillment, but also for an experience that cannot be realized until you get into the world of atoms.
Yeah.
And stores will be more interesting and employees will be more productive.
Yeah.
And this is a constant shift of technology. And from a customer perspective, getting back to what the anchor for all this is does this create great customer experiences? I think that the surprise for me in the book was that, unlike most digital books, it wasn't this sort of one note drum beat about digital winning. I mean, you can look at a case study like Lemonade, yes, which is very much, the sort of poster child. And you could say a lot of people would look at Lemonade and say, okay, here's the story. Here's Joe's cracked it. This is the answer. The world belongs to companies like that. And then you go on about Cemex, and you start to say, well, actually, there's different ideas. So I took away from this idea that everybody's path's going to be a bit different.
Yes.
In some ways, the only mistake you can make is lose sight of the customer and the employee and the shareholder. Somehow forget that these three groups are the whole point of this,
Exactly.
and be unwilling to frankly get creative and start thinking about this. And to your point, think from both angles, not just about how you better digitize what you're already doing, but think carefully about how you can take advantage of innovative digital solutions to completely change the nature of
Right.
the whole business. Is that, am I doing it a disservice? I seem to be on a role of summarizing people's life works into one sentence today.
No, I think you hit on the head. The only two comments I would make is, I love the Starbucks story. I had the pleasure of working with Howard Bahar a bit on that, who's a legendary person, is just how much they understand how the partner will help shape the overall experience, including the digital part of the experience, right? So that partnership with employees around your overall CX strategy, including the digital elements of that, really matters. Um, and the second thing that I think is a bit new, my colleague Dave Rogers from Columbia has written more extensively on this, is this notion of, in the Amazon case, how companies live inside a digital ecosystem. Unless you're selling cupcakes by the side of the road, and that actually might have some digital connection, but you need to think about your business in terms of the value proposition and the value network, because if you're not, a competitor is going to figure that out for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's a great note for us to close on. Joe, congratulations on getting the book out. I know these things are projects; they take a long time. In the book, you can see, parts that you must have written and then been forced to rewrite because events moved
Yeah,
on,
exactly.
right? And so it's really hard to put something down in print. But I think that tuning that out and looking at the underlying facts that say, look, there's some fundamental principles here that are going to age very well, because they are going to be key to this. I think it makes it a really great contribution to the canon right now in the space. And congratulations. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing more about the book.
Sounds great. Let's connect again sometime, okay? It'd be great to reconnect and see.
We'll see
evolve.
who was right. We'll place some bets and see whether we were right. And if we just connect in the metaverse, then it's going to be a surprise to me. Let me put it that way.
If I can't make it, I'll send my avatar.
Good punchline. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Richard. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.